Urban legends or urban tales are usually stories that are derived from folklore and tradition, believed by a certain number of people that is then usually passed down orally to others. These are usually the most common stories you will hear your grandparents say, with most seeming almost improbable or almost seeming like a fantasy. Often these stories would contain myths, origins, superstitions regarding things of today that in paper just really seem like they're impossible. But due to the fact that it's handed down from past generations, it's taken as something that one should believe for. We often see older people to be wiser as they have experienced more, so it seems like these urban legends become legends because they seem improbable, but due to its traces backing behind it, also seems to be true. And now in the story, the title starts with a T instead. It's urban legends instead of just urban legends. So the reason for that is in the story, the two main characters are Jing and Vince. Jing is Vince's sister, which tells him of a story about a man working as an OFW, as an engineer in Dubai, and he knew of his friend that was going to go home back to the Philippines for the holidays, and the man asked for him to count him in. But instead, he didn't pay for an airline ticket, he paid for an extra baggage fee. From that, you can infer that he hid inside one of the boxes or the baggage among with the rest that were on the trunk of the airplane. Unfortunately, due to the ill circumstances that he has met, he died due to complications of hypothermia. And from hearing the story, Vince did not believe it. Vince was not utterly convinced. He thought that there were so many loopholes and that there were so many things that did not pan out. Like, how could they have not noticed or detected a man hiding inside a box? After all, airports have tight security. And because of this, he dismissed it as a turban legend. Turbans are headwear that are usually worn by people of Middle Eastern descent, which is exactly where Jing's story takes place. And that's why Vince dismissed it as a turban legend, something that he couldn't believe, so he dismissed it as an urban legend. Another thing though, although it could not mean anything, this could be, for all intents and purposes, unintentional, but I couldn't help but draw a connection of the title to the word turbine as well. Seeing as how the myth or the story took place inside an airplane, a man who was hiding inside the box, one could not help but make the connection that it could have possibly been also be a connection to the word turbine for turbine legend. But that's just my opinion. In the poem Justice, it centralizes on the idea that our country is starting to lose sight of what justice really is. Heck, if I were to be honest, I don't even know if we've really ever had any proper justice in our country. In the poem, there were many symbolisms in place that were meant to give us a clearer context, a clearer idea of what justice really is. A blindfold representing that justice is impartial, unprejudiced, unbiased, equitable. Thought's feather and the scales of Ma'at, concepts in Egyptian mythology that are meant to serve as a way of judgment, measuring the purity, the innocence of your heart and your soul. But then let's look to our country and ask yourself, do we live up to any of those? In the poem, it was also stated that the Roman goddess Justitia, the most common symbol found in courts for depicting morality, truth, and justice, is slowly fading away. In the world that we live in now, evidences can be forged, testimonies can be falsified, and our governing members are corrupt. There isn't really any way for justice to thrive in our country. Another thing though mentioned by the poem is money. And as the common saying goes, money is the root of all evil. Those who are bound to its insatiable desire, turn a blind eye to justice and only seek and pursue their own selfish interests. And at the end of the poem, another important thing was stated, which was about the impeachment of Chief Justice Renato Corona on December 21st, 2011. It gives us the message that no matter your power, your position, your standing, the law is inescapable. The law is absolute and pure. Be you a priest, a senator, even a god. Nothing escapes the law. It gives us the message that no matter who you are, your actions, consequences will always exact a toll back on you. In the narrative preludes, it tells us of a story of concubinage, betrayal, and gender inequality. It tells us of the story of a woman and her husband's infidelity. Within the extrinsic weaving of the story, one might notice that heat is one of the centers of theme throughout the story. There are two statements that are prominently indicating the word heat. The first one being that the herbalist, a friend of the protagonist, Nenita, gave her a herb that was supposedly to make his balls shrink, give him hallucinations, and make his blood boil until his veins popped. And in the last line of the story, Nenita went outside to gather some leaves, and she stated that, and I quote, that it was certainly hot enough to boil an old man's blood and pop his veins. The exact same phrase worded again paragraphs from after it was first stated. And now I think this is relevant because I think that it holds importance as to why it was repeated. It tells us a message, something that, what if Nenita killed her own husband? Now hear me out on this. In the story, we know that the husband has had many affairs with other women, and we also know that Nenita takes her back and nurses him back to health. No questions, no worrying, no complaining. She just lets her husband back in. And that alone for me is quite suspicious. The story is worded in such a way that it implicates that the husband died due to a heat stroke, and also because of the complications that he already had. But hear me out again. At the end of the story, when the final moments of the husband finally took place, Nenita laughed at her own silliness along with the applause of the crowd. For me, I take Preludes as a story of a woman trapped in a relationship bound to a husband whose infidelity knows no bounds. A woman who no longer feels for her husband, with obligation being the only thing that remains. If we go back to those two prominent lines that I mentioned earlier, Nenita says the exact same phrase at the end of the story, the exact same way the herbalista worded it when she said it to her. And for me, this means that Nenita knew it was her. Nenita was the one who killed her husband, using the herbs that the herbalista gave secretively. And after doing this, she was finally freed of the constraints that she felt. She was finally free of her obligation as a wife to take care of a husband that never even loved her. Nenita was finally free. And that, however, is only my interpretation of the story, and it may be completely far off from what the author had intended, but isn't that what stories are for?